Welcome to the Modern Classrooms Project podcast. Each week, we bring you discussions with educators on how they use blended, self-paced, and mastery-based learning to better serve their students. We believe teachers learn best from each other, so this is our way of lifting up the voices of leaders and innovators in our community. This is the Modern Classrooms Project podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 206 of the Modern Classrooms Project podcast. My name is Toni Rose, and they, them pronouns, a designated hype person here at Modern Classrooms. And I am joined today by an educator who has gone through kind of like all the spectrums, right? Like an educator, a teacher leader, a school leader, all the way up to superintendent. And so I'm just really excited to be here to spend this time and be in the same space as Don Allen. So welcome, Don.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here today.
Yeah, it's really so exciting to be in this space with you. And thank you so much for saying yes to the podcast. I know that you are a huge fan of MCP. I know you and I also met, I think in 2021, right, Don?
I was during the pandemic, 2020, 2021. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. And then my brain was expanding every time I talked to Don. And so I've just always hyped Don up as well. Whenever we have opportunities, I'm like, we got to put Don Allen there. So you've been with us for a hot minute. And so before we get started, what is bringing you joy currently?
Just the summer, camping, relaxing, spending time with my middle school boys, 6th grade and 8th grade, and trying to see what's in them that I could bring into a classroom or into a school, because they're both doing really good. Just being with the family during the summer. This is the first summer I've had off since 2015. And I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, definitely needed. I'm glad that you have this summer to be with your family and be with your kids. How is it having 2 middle school kids at home?
The words that come out of those boys' mouth, oh my goodness. It kind of reminds me, they're nice. They don't do it in school because they're both straight A students. They're both just proficient, doing really good. And the thing is, it's like just having them here, it kind of sets the tone and the tenor for what I should expect from a middle school because of all the slang that I've learned from them and what they say. So if I go in as an administrator or as a teacher and I start using those words, the students stop and they look at me and they go, how did you know that? It just forms a better, kind of relationship with whoever you're talking to. So it's fun.
Yeah, it definitely keeps you young, being around students that age. So Don, are they considered Gen Alpha or Gen Z?
I think it's Gen Z because my 11-year-old always walks around and says, you can't say that to me because I'm Gen Z and you're a boomer. I said, oh, really? So.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I know that Gen Zers are so proud to be Gen Zers, and I love that for them.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that part before we get into our conversation. So, all right, Don, tell us, the listeners, a little bit more about who you are and how you started your education/MCP journey.
Well, it was really by chance. I wasn't always in education. I was in corporate America for about 22 years, marketing, public relations, in media, television, radio, and print, and part of Six Sigma teams and internet marketing teams that went around the country, blah, blah, blah. It was really good. And then I met my wife in 2009, who is a professor at the University of Minnesota. And she goes, you would make a great teacher. And I says, really? And I'm also a veteran of the United States Army. And it just so happened I got a call about the same time we got engaged and say, hey, do you want to go back to school and get your master's and do this, and that? I said, you know what? I was just thinking about that. Yeah, I want to go. I want to be a teacher. So I ended up going to university here locally and getting a master's in teaching, a master's in education, a master's in communication, educational specialist, which is a master's, of course. And now I'm finishing my doctorate in education. But I'm also have a superintendent license, which I got earned in 2023. And just to top it off, this fall I'm taking 14 credits because I have to do the doctorate program, and I've added an additional principal license. So I want to have everything. So I'm doing everything. So when they look at my license, they see everything from tier 4 English teacher all the way down to up to superintendent. So it's a journey, partnering with different people. And what led me to the Modern Classroom Project was their Black male engagement piece that they had in 2020. And I just was searching online because I was so bored at home during the pandemic. I says, there has to be some kind of professional development I can do, because we can't go to Minnesota Department of Education anymore. We can't go to the school building, and boom, this pops up. So I signed up and went through the course, mentored course with a bunch of the other guys. And I says, wow, this is like, we need this in all of the schools in Minnesota. But back then I was just like a low level English teacher teaching concurrent enrollment. I would tell people about it. They're like, get out of here. We don't want to talk to you. So I got on the phone. I remember this. I got on the phone and I called this local foundation. I says, hey, you guys have got to get them in Minnesota. And they did something. I don't know, but they're here. You guys are everywhere. But that's the origin. Don't let anybody tell you different, because I was there on ground floor and put in a call. Didn't write a grant, put in a call, and whatever work you guys did on your end, it worked, because everybody that I talked to in the Twin Cities public schools and suburban school district knows about the Modern Classroom Project, even if they're using it or not using it.
Yeah. And I know, like, you've just been such an impactful, like, just an advocate for this model, right? And I know with Modern Classroom as well, like Minneapolis, whenever we had something happening in Minneapolis, we would like, okay, we got to reach out to Don. We got to reach out to Don. So it's definitely all about connections, right? So we appreciate you just being such a presence for us, and always just, again, hyping up the model and speaking so positively about it. And I remember the cohort of the Black male educator cohort. And I remember being so excited that we had this specifically for Black male educators, because, you and I have had conversations too of like, there's not enough Black male educators. And so really trying to figure out how can we continue to help, support, empower, and really make teaching sustainable, especially for Black male educators. And so this is really great. Thank you. I didn't know that you were an Army veteran. That's amazing. How did I not know that?
Yes. Back in the day when we were just in the woods 30 days out of a month, there was no war going on, no conflict. I was in Seattle, Fort Lewis. It was pretty exciting. I had a wonderful time.
Yeah, thank you for your service. And I appreciate you just,
thank you,
kind of taking all of what you know from your past experiences into education. And so, all right, well, given your extensive experience in both academia and the public school system, right, from being a teacher to a teacher leader to school leader and then a district level leader, right, how do you see the relationship between higher education and K-12 education evolving, particularly in addressing this achievement gap? Because I know that you're always talking about this gap, right, especially with our Black and Brown students. So what are your thoughts?
Well, there's a piece that I think is missing. You have a lot of things happening here with education, and especially in let me give you some context. The Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, actually have the worst achievement gap between Black and white students. But then again, according to Cerisi, this research firm, which is actually a law firm that they did the research, 40% of the dominant kids in the dominant culture cannot read either at grade level. So that becomes a problem. And so when you look at addressing the relationship between higher education and the involvement and addressing the achievement gap, you have to take it from a constructivist approach. And what's missing out of the classrooms is what I call the Pygmalion effect. The Pygmalion effect is teacher thinks student is smart, teacher focuses on student, student learns more, student gets better grades. It's a reinforcement loop. And this is where the Modern Classroom Project, you can set that right in the middle of that loop with forward-facing trackers, blended learning, self-paced structures, mastery-based grading. It goes hand in hand with the Pygmalion effect. And we're missing out of that out of a lot of school systems, a lot of curriculum, and a lot of teachers. And I'm not going to knock any teachers or anything like that, but there's a serious challenge when when you add culture and human capital and work groups inside of learning organizations to they have a responsibility. For example, real quickly here, the school that I just left, it was in my contract, of course. I was shocked because we did all this testing, we did all this work. I had every one of the teachers to take the free Modern Classroom Project course online, and they didn't have a lot of money. They still don't. But 90% of the students in K through 8 were in the 0 to 10 percentile, which means that none of them were reading at grade level, none of them were doing math, none of them were doing science, social studies, anything. And because this is a systemic problem, and when you look at the gap called achievement, educational, we have the talent. It's not the children. It's the resources. And so that's kind of how I look at it, in a nutshell. I can talk about this for 4 hours. You know that already. And this is not a 4-hour long podcast. So we'll leave it at that.
That's so fascinating that you say it's more so the resources, right? I think I completely agree with you, even working in some of the quote unquote worst public schools in this country, right? It's like, it's really interesting to think about how it's so easy to blame people when in actuality, it's like, no, it's a systemic issue. And it's also the lack of resources. And we have money, we have funding. We just don't know where that funds are going. So that's like a whole conversation as well, that we can have a conversation about too. And so, okay, well, Don, I think I want to circle back to what you were saying about how you got your superintendent license, but then now you're adding 14 more credits this fall to get your principal license. I think for me, who have never had any interest in becoming a principal or a superintendent, what's the difference between those two?
Oh, the money the college charges, basically.
Okay. That's fair.
No, yeah, basically. Here goes the deal. I'm a different kind of person, and I believe in looking at stuff from a constructivist lens, and how can I build knowledge off what's going on? And what I found out is, like, I have a superintendent license. It should supersede any principal job or license. And in Minnesota, you can get waivers to be a principal if you have a superintendent license. And I went to this one school district that I really liked, interviewed with them a couple of times, and I'm pretty sure they were to hire me as a assistant principal, which I would have been totally cool with. But it came down to the bottom line. They says, well, we're not going to give you this opportunity because you do not have a principal's license. I said, really? Excuse me. And I says, that's all? And so I called up my school, Hamlin University, and I says, hey, can I get a letter that says that I qualify to be a principal? They says, hey, you got to take 2 classes, and all those classes are you shadowing a principal for 80 hours. And then on top of my doctorate in education classes, it comes to 14 credits, which I'm cool with because I'll get it done quick, fast, in a hurry. I'll be licensed by February. Now I want to know the next excuse they might have.
That's really frustrating. And I'm sure that that's not just in Minnesota. I'm sure that happens quite often, especially when it comes to having folks of color apply for higher level positions, right? Because I often hear about like, oh, I'm actually overqualified, but there's a nitpicking thing that's happening of like, oh, okay, like, well, we can't hire you because you don't have this one thing. When it's like, but it doesn't make any sense. So, yeah, go ahead.
It's not really even worth going back and forth with them because you look at it and you say, okay, I know that how the system works. I know how easy it is. And the race card piece, it's like, I don't consider myself a victim. It just makes me work a little bit harder. And so I says, okay, I'm going to go get that principal license and then come back to you next spring and see what you have to say. Because now you have nothing to say. And we're going to see what happens. So it's your biases. It's not mine at all. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and it so happened that you're also a lifelong learner. So you actually love being able to expand your own brain and your own knowledge of like, okay, cool. That's like a barrier. I'm going to knock down that barrier. Right. I just know that like I just know, Don, that I hear time and time again from educators of color that they feel the need to have certificates. They feel the need to have all of these things so that nobody can kind of invalidate what their skills and assets are. And so I think, that's just a really interesting, it's just interesting. Let's say that. let's stick with that. Okay. So as a teacher on the front lines of education, right? Because you've had a couple of years where you're in the classroom teaching students, and then someone who is also pursuing a doctorate in education. I don't know if you have a comment on this, but how do you envision the role of AI and big data shaping the future of teaching and learning?
That's a great question, Toni. And my professor wanted me to leave my dissertation and do another dissertation. And I had to make a deal. I says, okay, my first dissertation is about charter schools and how they've become successful, especially for Black kids in the communities. My second part is, I've been a fan of the internet when it was Prodigy. And AI is very important to me because now I want to look at AI has a tool, because I'm an English teacher, I'm a writing teacher. I taught at the University of Minnesota strategic writing for professional communication and crisis communication, and 90% of the kids or the students could not write in higher ed. So I'm thinking, I'm working out a question now for this, but how can we use AI in big data? And AI has a big role in future classrooms, in the K through 12 system and also in the higher ed system. And I think it's important that we embrace AI. Again, I'm going to go back to the barriers. When the internet first came out, schools and students of color in my neighborhood and around the country were behind. They didn't have one-on-one equipment, didn't know how to use the Google Suite, Google Docs or anything. And they're still today probably 3 or 4 years behind. Now AI has been laid on top of us. So how do we get our students and adults up to speed using the AI? I'd love, the last time I had to sit in for this English teacher at my last gig for like 3 days because he was sick or whatever. And so I told the students, I says, we're going to play with AI. I want you guys to ask this Chat GPT a question that you really want to know the answers to. I want you to be specific and ask it to write 750 words. Okay. I had 30 kids ask 30 different questions. And then I asked them, second part of the lesson, would you write like that? Have you seen this type of writing before? And I said, I want you to take what Chat GPT slammed out to you there and write an analysis about what would you write? What would you think? I got beautiful papers out of that, but you can incorporate it in the classroom. Of course, you have students that in higher ed, I've had like 20 papers that wanted to use chat or one of these AI things to write papers. And I never went down on them or just said, hey, you can't do that. Da, da, da. I said, hey, this is really great, but it came up as AI. Can you write an analysis for it rather than burning them at the college level and ruining their college career? And they were appreciative of that, and they never did it again. But yeah, I see a big role in big data, data mining, AI, and shaping the future of education, not only for teachers, because right now, as you know, teachers can actually type in, give me a lesson plan for an English class based on the book Raisin in the Sun for fifth graders. And AI will spit out a 10-page lesson plan that is almost perfect. So that should make it easier for teachers. And I'm all for that, just as long as you're teaching also.
Yeah. And I'm also thinking too, because I love AI. I utilize AI all the time, especially with someone who's neurodivergent, right? Like it's really hard for me to start with a blank page. And something that I talk about with my colleagues and my supervisor is that with AI, yes, utilize it. And AI will always need human eyes on them, right? Like the stuff that AI produces, there's got to be a human looking through and fact checking and making sure that it aligns with the question, that it sounds, like you said, like an analysis, right? And I also want to say, I really love this whole concept of you being like, you know what, like, yeah, I've had some students in higher ed who turned in work that was generated by AI. And instead of penalizing them and giving them a 0 and ruining their college experience and their learning experience, I provided them an option to give me an analysis of why or how and what the AI came up with, right? And so it's funny, Don, because I'm currently reading Grading for Equity because we have an MCP book club now where we're reading this book. And one of them is like, we don't actually want to penalize kids' behavior through grades. Because in that sense, we're just taking away that learning. We're telling kids, actually, you cheated, so that's a 0. And then you still don't know if that kid is able to do the standard or the skill. You just kind of gave them an out, right? An easy way out, honestly, for them. Because then now they know, oh, I don't have to do that. So that's cool. I'll just cheat and get a 0 and give it, and call it a day. And so I really appreciate you naming this thing of like, yeah, I mean, they cheated. And then we had a conversation about it, and they had to do extra stuff of like, hey, let's analyze this and give me kind of like an explanation, or rather just again, like an analysis, right? And so I think this is, thank you so much. This is really, really exciting. So let's talk about transitioning, because it seems like you've transitioned a lot in education, right? You've gone from a teacher to a superintendent. Now you're thinking about being a principal. There was even an opportunity to be an assistant principal, and now possibly you could be back in the classroom. And so you're very versatile, Don, and I love this. And I think that's the beauty of education as well, too, especially for folks who love education. It's like, no problem. I'll go back in the classroom. That is A-okay with me. I actually love being with the kids.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, it's like, that's not... It's not a punishment.
No, not at all.
So what leadership qualities do you believe are essential for creating a positive and effective school culture, especially in like challenging urban environments? And I think also too, Don, let's define what urban environments are for folks who may not know.
In the hood. No, just the urban environment is just like the inner city. Every state in the United States has an inner city with at least 33% or more African American, Hispanic, Latino, Asian population that might be somewhere between 50 and 150% below the federal poverty line. Then you might have a middle class. We have a missing middle here in this country quite a bit. So there's people on top and there's people on bottom. And the missing middle kind of fluctuates depending on where you are and what you do and your job, et cetera, and where you live. And so the leadership qualities, the second part of that question, I think it's important to human capital in work group cultures is different at every learning organization, at every school, every business. And I found it best to be a nuanced leader, which means that I won't come in ahead of the culture or behind the culture. I'll try to shapeshift into the middle of the culture and then pull those people to me that know what's going on, like the engineer or janitor or the office manager or the SPED director, more so than the assistant principal or the lead teachers. Or I want to know people in the building that has the dirt on everybody, and not necessarily dirt, but the information. You got to know who you're talking to, who you're dealing with. And when you treat the guy that cuts the grass for the school like you treat the person that's the principal or the lead teacher, the nuance piece is even more brightened, because also you have to look in the blind spots. I went into a situation as a superintendent where the school was over $300,000 in debt, as a favor to a friend who was the authorizer. And I told him, I says, this is my first superintendent job after I got my superintendent license, and there's things I didn't learn that I know I would learn there. And so, the nuance, looking into the blind spot, seeing what's going on, because you want to have, people say buy-in, and buy-in is good, but you need more of a collective determination. You need everybody on the same page, working for the same goals. And you need to appreciate the small stuff. Like the school had 2 teachers reach certification for Groves Learning. They're Groves certified teachers, which is huge in the Twin Cities. But that was something that was started before I even got into school. So when I got there and these teachers achieved that, and I recognized it in a big way, they said, well, you weren't here when we started. I said, but I'm here when you finished and you did it. And you're the first teachers to do it in 10 years. Thank you very much. Let's have a party, order some cupcakes and some lemonade, whatever. And so it's very important in these urban environments. Now, we had all Black teachers, all Black students, to understand what that culture is, what it represents to you as a leader, and to make sure that you're leading in a way that it's not like, well, let me just add this. I think Darth Vader was a great leader, minus the strangling. I think he uplifted people, but I didn't like the strangling. But right now, education needs a central antagonist. If we look at Detroit, Chicago, Minneapolis, New York, Denver, Washington, D.C., Miami, Florida, Houston, Texas, and many, many more cities are duplicating the results that are normal out of a urban community. The kids aren't reading at grade level. Math is not at grade level. Science, of course, is not at grade level. But we keep pushing kids through. And when we push them through, we graduate functional illiterates. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean that in a way that crime, the Kia boys, crime, the street robberies, crime, the shoplifting, crime, the riots and during the protests, stealing out of stores. And we don't teach our children about war. There's no Machiavellian concept about what is good. I'm not picking a side. I have yet to pick a side. I will not pick a side. But all I can say, if a student asks me who's better between this country and this country, and my standard answer has always been, if babies are being killed on both sides, you have to determine for yourself what is good or who is good. So it's challenging in the urban environment, to say the least.
Yeah. And I think this is another thing too, of like, it's not, it's really not white or black or like one way or the other, right? It's just there's a lot of layers. There's a lot of intersectionality with everything that's happening. And so I do want to just acknowledge the fact that you recognize the teachers, even though you didn't start with them, you were there when they finished, which I really love. And I also feel like when you were talking about leadership qualities, it's more so of like I think for me, it's like a needs assessment, right? Like coming in there and not ultimately trying to fix everything, but just like getting in with the community and understanding the perspective, understanding the needs and the desires and the challenges that community has. And I really love this whole thing that you said of you're not above the culture or below the culture, you're shape-shifting into the middle of the culture. And so this is your way of just creating this collective determination, which I love instead of buy-in, because I feel like as a collective, we can do so much, right? And really being able to have conversations with people who don't particularly have conversations like we do, right? And so I love this concept of you having conversations with custodians, with office assistants, with really the whole thing, like just the community itself, right? It's not necessarily going straight to educators and school leaders, but also who else are part of this community that makes a huge difference, that keeps this going for all of our students. And another thing that resonated for me as an English teacher, right? Because we're both English teachers, which I love. We got to know the audience. Right. This is something that I tell my sister all the time, too. It's like I chuckle at her because it's like, you got to know your audience. When you have an idea, determine how you can, again, create this like collective determination as opposed to just saying like what it is that you want to say. And then everyone's like, no, I actually hate that idea. Right. It's just really knowing your audience before you come in there with an idea that may not work for everyone because you don't know your audience. And the functional illiteracy, those are also terms that I have not heard, but it also makes a lot of sense, right? When we continue to push push students through, or even like push adults through without any kind of education, without any kind of restorative, I don't want to say like punishment, but just like restorative practice of like, hey, you messed up and this is what we have to do to fix it, as opposed to just like, no, you're in trouble, so you're going to go to detention, and then never have this like conversation or even a time to reflect, right? And so I love this whole concept too of like determining for yourself what is good, what is bad. I cannot make those decisions for you. And we want to teach our students to be able to critically think and critically analyze everything that's happening in this world in their classrooms and outside of the classroom, right? Again, you're just like giving me all the words, Don. This is fantastic.
Let me insert this from what you just said. Maslow's hierarchy of needs has this piece in there called self-actualization. And we have to get kids to self-actualization. And part of self-actualization is that they know and understand discernment. You know, what's right, what's wrong. And if you look at testing, MCAs, anything, testing, we can tell that our kids are not learning discernment because they can't eliminate a multiple choice answer out of 4 answers in a paragraph. You know, ergo, you have 1.3% of 1,000 students at a 2% rating or proficiency in science. So that's a very important piece, and I'm glad that you said that.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that. And this also brings back again the whole mastery-based concept of teaching and learning, right? Like we're not grading for effort. I know that we have students who give all of their effort and still not meeting the standards. It doesn't mean that it's unfair. It doesn't mean that we don't love those babies, but we don't want to lie to them and say, oh, actually, we're going to give you an A because you've given effort. And effort is subjective. It's also very biased of us to be like, oh, this kid is giving a lot of effort, so I'm going to give them an A. And so when we think about mastery-based, like teaching and learning and grading as well, is like making sure that our students are really ready for like the real world out there. That's essentially what we want them to do. We're not going to lie to them and say, oh, because you gave your effort or because you showed up every day, you have mastered this skill. And it's like, that's not how the real world works. Actually, we don't want to lie to them in the classroom and say, you know what, you showed up, you participated, and you gave effort, full effort. So we're going to give you an A. And then they still don't understand the concept. And this is, again, just kind of like this gap that continues to widen. Because I think we as humans, want to be fair through unfair practices. Does that make sense what I'm saying, Don?
That makes a lot of sense. I stopped working in summer school credit recovery because what you just said about the effort, it wasn't about learning. Oh, they showed up every day. They did the boilerplate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The work is, but they showed up. Okay. And so instead of that F, we're going to make it an A because we do standard-based grading and they hit all the marks. And I push back against that so much. I said, you could use this summer, let them show up, but let's give them the full banquet of an ELA class, of a math class, of a chemistry class, or whatever they need to graduate. And let's do it instead of them just hitting the marks for this credit recovery. But yeah, the effort grading is like, and the teachers, I saw teachers in that setting, they sit back all day, give them a packet. Once they turn that packet in, they turned it in. It's not even really graded or scored. So it's crazy. So we should do school a lot differently.
Yes, I completely agree with you. And that's what I'm hoping to kind of shift with like modern classroom, right? Of course, like our model does not fix all the problems. It just creates other solutions that are better for students to be able to really enjoy their learning experiences. So, and then another, one thing that I thought about too, Don, is this coercion and compliance, right? In education. It's like, okay, well, you know what? If you participate or if you do this extra credit, you'll get a passing grade. That's coercion. That's like getting students to comply. And again, our students are brilliant. Our students will know how to do school. They're not actually going to embrace learning, especially when it comes to doing all of that, right? And another thing, too, Don, when you were talking about, the summer credits, more students are getting the credits in the summer. I was thinking, well, if they had, a modern classroom classroom in their, like, for example, if they failed ELA, right? And then they had a teacher who was implementing our model, instead of creating packets, they can just go back to the LMS and go through the lessons that they didn't do well on.
Bingo.
Right? Like, be able to reassess, redo all of the things that they missed out on for that school year. So then the teachers aren't really stressed in the summer of creating packets of like, it's just meaningless packets. Y'all, I hate packet work as well. It's like my least favorite. But like actually making it more meaningful of like, this is what we learned in school and during the school year. So you didn't get it during the school year. So now you won't have to do it in the summer. So it's, again, no easy way out, right? Like, no, we're going to put this in front of you again and give you other opportunities to have a better understanding of what we're learning in class so that you can actually be ready for next school year.
Thank you. Or to graduate with the credits that you missed out for playing around in school and not doing anything in the first place. And it's not your fault. We get it.
Right. Oh, this is such a beautiful, like, it's just all aligning beautifully.
Hey there, listeners. This is Zach, dropping in with some learning opportunities and announcements for the week of September 15th. Our back-to-school toolkit is out and ready for you. For this year, we focused on communicating with caregivers and stakeholders all about blended, self-paced, and mastery-based learning. Have you always wanted a community to read books with? We're hosting a book club with ScreenPal and Cami starting at the end of this month, and that's September of 2024. The community has chosen to read UDL and Blended Learning by Katie Novak and Catlin Tucker. Join us in this 10-week community of practice to learn with and from educators across the country, receive premium access to both ScreenPal and Cami, and deepen your understanding of UDL and Blended Learning. Finally, want to learn more about how to use AI to create self-paced lessons for you? Join us in this 30-minute info webinar with Teach Flows on Tuesday, September 17th at 6 p.m. Eastern. Registration links are in the show notes, but for now, let's get back into it with Toni Rose and Don.
Okay, so Don, how has Modern Classroom like supported, empowered, or impacted your journey? Because I know that I often get text messages from you and Facebook messages of like all the cool things that you're doing with all of your classes in the schools that you're working and the districts that you're working at. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about how we can support you or how we've supported you in the past.
Well, the leadership cohort that we just got done with in June was really wonderful because I got a chance to intermingle with a lot of folks. Some folks I met out of town last year, and it was really cool. But the thing is, you said something about that work during the school year that you've done with the Modern Classroom Project, bringing it into the summer school piece. I wrote this piece it's called Recipe for Two Characters. And the student would get together and he or she would pick one of 10 conversational pieces. Like, you get stuck in the elevator with another person for 30 minutes. What's that conversation look like? You've met someone that you haven't seen in 20, or you've run into someone again you haven't seen in 20 years that you thought was missing, or you get into a fender bender in downtown Minneapolis or St. Paul, wherever you live. And with two people, what does the conversation look like? So I recorded this as a Modern Classroom where the PDF had the link that said, hey, click here first for the introduction to the lesson. Click here for me to read the whole lesson to you while you follow along. Click here to listen to me talk about the questions, and click here for the exemplar of how this would read out, the actual typed document in the format. So I had an opportunity to bring that into a summer school program. The teacher says, you're crazy. Why are you doing that? Why aren't you using the packets? I said, because this is way more fun. And we had a behavior problem there, and the kids used to love to run in, put the headphones in to see what kind of crazy video I made for that morning. And because I have this Star Trek background, Captain Kirk, Spock, McCoy, all these people, a thing with Rambo, a thing with Deadpool. They were loving it. And so the Modern Classroom universe, Modern Classroom Project universe, as I call it, has supported me and given me tools that I could use, or either say to a teacher that has never known anything about the Modern Classroom Project, to say, hey, they have a free course, and I see you kind of stressing out a little bit. Why don't you go take the free course? and see if you can adopt some of that into your, and all I hear is like, oh, I love doing the videos, or I love doing this way. I love, like when I worked over here at a charter school as a lead English teacher, or the middle school lead teacher, actually, I took pictures. I learned this from the Modern Classroom Project. I took pictures, face shots of all my classes. So I had a board with 30 kids for that class, a board with 30 kids, just their mugs, just sitting there. Then I put the dates. I said, every day you come to school, I want you to go grab your face and stick it on that day. It's just a student-facing tracker. It wasn't about any assignments. They had really terrible attendance. And says, if you guys get down here, we're going to have this great get-together here at the end of the month. So students came in. I had one student who was suspended for fighting, who actually had his mom to bring him up to the school and say, I'm here, but I'm not here, but I need to move my face over to this day. I got suspended, but I want to see that I'm here and I'll be back tomorrow. I said, cool. And just the engagement that the Modern Classroom Project lets you have as a teacher, especially if you're a creative teacher, you could roll with this on any level. I used the model at the University of Minnesota. I told my university I'm at now getting my doctorates, I says, you guys have to teach this in your master's in teaching courses. You shouldn't let another teacher walk out of this MAT program without understanding the Modern Classroom Project. Of course, I'm a little bit abrasive with my push with these guys because I've been there for so long, and they kind of look at me like, oh, go away, it's him again. But there's opportunities, and if you miss these opportunities now, they're going to come back around. You're going to jump on board, just like St. Paul Public Schools. When I worked there, they didn't want to hear me talk about Modern Classroom Project at all. I talked to the superintendent, principals, assistant superintendents. I said, hey, we should be doing that. 2 years after I leave, there's 150 teachers getting trained on it. Oops. Yeah, I told you, and other places that I've talked to that kind of, nah, we're not going to do that. But that's okay, because that's how evolution happens. It happens in usually someone that is not really part of the mainstream comes in and says, hey, let's do this. That's not a good idea. And you have to sit back and make them think it's their idea. So when you do that, this is what you get. But yeah, it's really fun to be a part of this. I always feel connected to it, and I talk about it all the time. I even used it in an interview last week, and you should have saw Draws drop to the table. Like, he's a genius. He said, blended learning, self-paced structures, and mastery-based grading. We have never heard that before. It's like, oh my, they were bowing to me. I thought they were giving me an offering for church. I'm like, oh wow, this is beautiful. Hallelujah. And, but it's like, if they don't know, that's an opportunity for me to say, hey, why don't you go check it out? It's not free, but you should get everybody in the school district to do this, because it's what will work. Especially if you're starting like the micro schools they're talking about now and these other things, you need to start off with this, because just basically the way education is going, it's going to implode on itself, especially here in the Twin Cities. I expect in the next 15 months. And we can't keep putting out these kids that don't know anything. And I'll close on this. I went to the McDonald's here close by my house, and I knew there was a bunch of high school kids working there, and I just wanted to test their acumen. So I walked up. I said, can I help you, sir? I says, I would like a hamburger with cheese. She rung up a hamburger and rung up an extra cheese, instead of just typing in a cheeseburger, hitting the cheeseburger button. I wasn't mad, but that was my test. That was like my litmus test to see, okay, are they learning in school? This person's in the 10th grade. Maybe that self-actualization, that discernment is not working. But anyway, getting back to my point, I think that I know that the Modern Classroom Project has given me tons of resources. I have access to things that, like, if I decide to be a teacher, a dean, or a principal or superintendent again, there's stuff right now online that I can access that will make me be better than everyone else around me. Thank you very much.
Yes, I love that so much, Don. And I know that we tend to lean lean on you for a good amount, actually, especially for the leadership cohort, because I think what makes you that much more amazing is the fact that you were a teacher and you implemented this model, and then you became a school leader, and then you continue to utilize this model in whatever position that you take, right? And I think that that's just such a beautiful thing. And I also love that when you were talking about how you use the model in the summer, right? You provided those options for your students, and you provided accessibility as well, right? Really like thinking outside of the box for you anyway, or maybe not even thinking outside of the box. It's like, how can I make this simple for my students, and how can I make this more engaging and more meaningful? And so I really love this whole concept that you talk about, like like teachers are creatives, right? Like we are able to create and be creative. And so when we're given the permission and the autonomy to do so, we can do some really wonderful things. And I love that you just created a student tracker that's specifically for attendance, because you knew that attendance was very much a challenging thing at your school. And I love that. I mean, like, to have a student come in with their mom just so that they can be like, that's so cool. That's so cool.
Yeah. He was suspended. Okay. But he came, it blew me away. I said, really? So that just made me know that it does work. It does get in their heads. So
yeah, that's amazing. And also, again, you're just like expanding my brain. I worked at McDonald's for like 8 years when I was in high school and in college as well. And I chuckled when you were like, I want a hamburger with cheese. And I know, and you're right, like that piece of skill, right? Of like, oh, well, okay, cool. But would you prefer like a cheeseburger because it would save you this amount of money or whatever, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But that was what I would always do when I was in McDonald's. Like, I was all about saving people money also. I'm just like, here's a hack. How about you do this, and this? And so, yeah, that's such an interesting point too, Don. That's so interesting that like, hey, I want this thing, and you're just taking it as is and not even like criticizing or analyzing or just being like, oh, actually there's like a better way to do that. Because again, like you said, discernment, right? The self-actualization, and then also just being able to like actually know, like, here's another option for you. Oh my gosh, what a skill. And how difficult is that skill? It really is challenging.
With technology, just quickly here, technology has taken, the cell phone has removed. I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, we didn't have cell phones or anything like that. And that space that teachers and educators need to navigate, that discernment, that all that stuff is taken away by the technology piece. That's why I was glad that last school I was in, there's no cell phones in any of the classrooms. We got a little bit done, not a lot to move the arrow, but it was okay. And so rather than me at 14 having 80 telephone numbers memorized of my aunts, my cousins, my uncles on a rotary dial, okay, that just builds, Hammond talks about serotonins. She talks about dopamines. And then, in learning and lessons, there's ignite, chunk, chew, and review and all that stuff. It's just not happening with our kids today until we implement it and put it back in the classroom. And that's another thing I just want to say in closing on the Modern Classroom Project. I can take other models for teaching that stimulate the brain, which is the most important thing when you're dealing, especially with middle schoolers who are in the middle of their adolescence. They're getting pimples. They're like, woo, hormones are going crazy. They're running into walls. And you're like, sit down. What are you doing? Yeah, she doesn't like you anyway. Be quiet. And so you're talking to them. You're trying to get them to just focus. But you could take other models and set them on top. Modern Classroom Project is the foundation. So I'm going to use that, but I might grab Hammond's model that says do a lesson that says ignite, chunk, chew, and review. Ignite. What's the lesson about? I'm going to record that video. Chunk. These are the things you have to read and watch, because not every kid is going to learn by reading. Okay. Review. What did Mr. Allen just show you or tell you? What did you just read? Ignite, chunk, chew, and I forgot chew. Chew it up, all the information, and then review. Let's go over it. Let's do a formative assessment, which is whatever you want them to do. The exit ticket, to a short paragraph essay, or just to have a conversation. So yeah, it's a wonderful thing to do and wonderful thing to have, and I'm appreciative 100%.
Yeah, I hear that again as well, Don, from multiple educators of, saying like, oh my gosh, Modern Classroom allows me to do building thinking classrooms. Modern Classrooms allows me to do UDL. It allows me to do like all of these things that educators have always wanted to do and just like didn't know how. So I'm really glad to hear that from our community as well. And so, okay, Don, I have a question, and I know I say this to you all the time. It's like, wow, you do a lot. How do you balance your personal and professional development? And what advice would you give to educators seeking to pursue further education? Because you've done a lot, full-time teaching and doing all of these things, and you have a family. And you're doing all of these like personal pursuits as well. How do you balance all of that? And what's your advice?
Well, time management is a learned behavior, and you as an individual have to understand what's important to you, not what's important to everybody. So that meant I cut out 80% of my friends, or people that I thought were my friends, which gave me 3 to 6 hours a week extra. Then I says, okay, I'm going to focus on my family and my two boys and my wife, which is, we have a machine going around the house, and that worked out great. But it's just the time management. I know that I have assignments that I have to do. I know that I'm doing these degrees, these classes, how I'm going to do that. And that's why I try to also relate to my students about homework. Oh, I didn't do it, I didn't have time. No, that's not true. You have a lot of time. Think about the time when you're just sitting on the bed, looking out the window. Or you might go for a walk. Even though going for walks are great, but if you have something to do, maybe do it. And my satisfaction is finishing and then doing what I want to do. So if like I have assignments coming up for the end of August and the beginning of September for the doctorate in education program and the principal track, and I've basically done them. So I have to wait till the first class meeting and do the reviews. It's just a matter of time management and sitting back and knowing when you need a break. And that break is not necessarily calling and saying, I'm not going to school today, I'm not going to be coming to class, or I'm not going to do that. Break is more of a mental break and how you think. And I love to read. So I'm engulfed in 4 books right now that bring me pleasure and relaxation. And with the white noise in the background, I'm doing great. So,
yeah. And I got to ask, Don, what are you reading?
I am reading Peter Block, Community, one of the best books about building community. Like, the Modern Classroom has this really good piece on building community. I don't even think they've even read this book, the people that do it. But one of the most important parts of community is the invitation. Modern Classroom Project is great about invitations. Once you've locked in, they'll send you 800 million emails. Not really, but hey, this is what we're doing. This is what we're doing over here. Do you want to do it? This is the times, the invitation, and then the community building. I'm also reading Fosno. It's actually Fosnot. Fosno's Constructivism. How do you build knowledge? Linguistics for writers. I'm not going to get into that because we'll be talking all day. And the last one is The Best We Could Do. And also one more book I don't have over here. It's downstairs. I'm not going to run and get it. It's by, what's his name? It's called I Want Learn From You. I think it's Kozel, if I'm not mistaken. It talks about kids in urban school settings that just see the teacher. It might be a white teacher. It might be a blue teacher, whatever. But I don't like you. I don't like school. We don't speak academic language at home, and I don't want to learn from you. And it talks about those experiences he had in New York and other places and how to overcome that. But it's a really good book. But yeah, that's what I'm reading.
This is amazing. Also, not you calling us out on all of our emails. We're working on it, Don. We're working on it.
No, I don't have a problem with it because I had a period where I wasn't getting emails, but I could always count on an email from Modern Classroom Project. And that's what kind of helped me through a really serious phase, and I appreciate that. I'm saying keep them coming. If I choose to do something, I will jump on, like the, what is it? the top rated educator piece that you have, distinguished.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I get emails for that all the time, and I'm going to do it. It's just that the timing is not ready yet. And I've been getting them since 2020, and I save them in a file. I'm not going to go count them, but there's a lot in there. And I'm going to do it eventually. Keep sending them out. Don't stop because I said this.
No. It's okay. I know it's just something that, when we're thinking about building community, like there are folks like you who don't mind the emails, but then there are also folks who are like, oh my gosh, way too many emails, right? So we're really trying to be responsive to our community. And so thank you for sharing what you're reading. And those all sound fantastic. So listeners, we'll put that in the show notes as well, in case you want to just jump into those reads as well. And so, okay, well, Don, how can our listeners connect with you? Because I'm sure that they'll be asking.
Oh, wow. I don't want any calls. No, I'm just kidding. I have a blog, and I'll give you the address here when we get done here or whatever. It's called Journal of a Black Teacher. And I put a lot of things I'm thinking about up there. I might share them on LinkedIn or Facebook, and then I might not. But it's just the way that I see education through my eyes as a nuanced leader and someone that really looks into the blind spots that is sometimes a central antagonist and disrupts the status quo because it needs to be disrupted. And I would love for people to follow that. Right now, I'm following it and my other account is following it. So I'm two people following the account, but that's done purposely because it's basically for me, for my research, from what I'm thinking. And I have stories up there that I think anybody could relate with in the country. And I wrote for the Independent Business News Network for over 13 years about education and mostly politics and education. And this is kind of a spinoff from the Independent Business News Network, where it's just I'm staying in education, I'm speaking fact, and I'm not leaning to the left or to the right. And I'm talking about things that concern people.
I love that. Yeah, definitely share that with us. So we'll put it in the show notes so our listeners can read through your perspective. So I'm really excited about that. Well, Don, thank you so much for sharing your experience and expertise with us. I just absolutely love being in the same virtual space. I know you and I have never met in person, which is wild to me. And I feel like this conversation was long overdue. So again, just thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And listeners, remember, you can always email us at podcast@modernclassrooms.org. And you can find the show notes for this episode at podcast.modernclassrooms.org/206. We'll have this episode's video uploaded on Modern Classroom's YouTube channel and transcript uploaded by Friday. So be sure to check back to access those. Also, we are asking our listeners to leave a review if this podcast has been helpful in supporting you to create a human-centered learning environment through a blended, self-paced, and mastery-based model. It does help other folks find it. Thank you all for listening. Have a great week, and we'll be back next Sunday. Don, you are the GOAT, per usual. Thank you for expanding my brain.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. You can find links to topics and tools we discussed in our show notes for this episode. And remember, you can learn more about our work at www.modernclassrooms.org, and you can learn the essentials of our model through our free course at learn.modernclassrooms.org. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at modernclassproj, that's Proj. We are so appreciative of all you do for students and schools. Have a great week, and we'll be back next Sunday with another episode of the Modern Classrooms Project podcast.